A Second Life by D. R. Groningen, Nick 083, Chapter 2. Time didn't really mean anything to Danny. He knew how to read a clock, but he didn't really know what day it was, so what did that matter? Also, since they were in space, there wasn't really a 24-hour day. He knew that the International Space Station experienced 16 sunrises and sunsets a day due to the speed they were traveling around the Earth. But that had been the old dimension, his old home. Who knew how fast the Watchtower was going? Maybe experienced more, or less? Nightwing would know. He felt a sort of familial bond with the man, coming from his chest. Perhaps he recognized him somehow, even though Danny didn't have any memories. Nightwing had been spending a lot of time with him, helping him strengthen the muscles throughout his body. Due to his help, Danny was able to walk on his own and eat without spilling everywhere. It felt great to be more independent. The people on the Watchtower were incredibly kind to him, generally always willing to answer questions. There was always someone around him, watching him though. Danny didn't really know about that. He also hadn't really told anyone that he was called Danny. He wasn't sure if that was what he wanted to be called in this new life. That was the whole point, right? The whole reason his other self had crossed dimensions? To let himself be someone new, someone else. But he kind of liked such a name. It felt right. It was hilarious to hear all the nicknames that the assorted heroes came up with. Bud, Buddy, and Kiddo were the most common ones used. A tall, strong-looking lady in some super cool armor with a glowing golden rope at her hip, who had introduced herself as Diana, liked to call him Little One. She was really fun, but probably pretty important, since she had only visited once, even though he could tell she liked him. Batman visited often, and would call him Chum, which was really weird. He was pretty sure Chum was a fish, or the bait used to attract fish. He wasn't really sure why Batman called him that, though he had heard Batman call both Nightwing and Robin Chum, so maybe that was Batman's thing? He didn't know, but it was kind of weird. It brought the word Fruit Loop to mind, but he also felt that Batman had done nothing to deserve that severe of an insult. Yet, at the same time, it was a cereal and not an insult. His memory was still a bit wonky. He remembered nothing before the time he woke up on the Watchtower. At least, he didn't think he did. Danny also hadn't really tried to recall anything from before he'd woken up here. From what he could hear from the other whispers of Cadmus, it hadn't been a great place. It was probably a good thing he couldn't remember. He only recalled his other life through dreams, and not much of it. It had only ever been repeats of what he had seen before, if he even dreamed of a previous life. Honestly, Danny was kind of okay with that too. Without those memories, he was free to just be himself, whoever that was. And Danny wanted to explore. He wanted to play, and he wanted to get off of the Watchtower. Yes, he loved space, but he was starting to feel really cooped up. He hadn't been let out of the room he'd woken up in. He really hated it. He glanced at his current babysitter, the green-skinned lady, Miss Martian. She wasn't paying that much attention to him, reading through something on one of those tablets. She'd given him some paper and crayons and told him to draw. Danny had for a while, but he was bored now. He wanted to see Nightwing. He always felt happier, safer, when the man went around. The heroes all seemed to live here, on the Watchtower, so he just had to sneak out and find him. Then they could play and hang out. Watch more of those Disney movies. Tell Nightwing that he had a name now. Well, he'd had one. just hadn't been sure he'd wanted to keep it yet. He was sure now. So, he was pretty sure what his powers were. He'd known as soon as he'd woken up that he could fly. He also just knew that he could turn invisible and go through walls, shoot the green blasty thing from his hand, and create shield with the same green stuff. Could also make this green scream thing, although he just instinctively knew that it would make him really tired. Oh, and he could make ice. He was pretty sure there were others, but those were the ones he could remember. Turning invisible, he made his way from the table in his room towards the wall, before going intangible. Outside was a pretty plain hallway. Boring. But he was sure he'd find people if he kept going. From his exploring, Danny learned that his room was in the hospital section of the space station. But man, this place was huge. There was a massive kitchen, which Danny may have taken a few chocolate bars from. He just knew that Kit Kats and Twix were his favorites, despite the fact that he couldn't remember having them before. Danny was pretty sure no one would mind, that no one would miss them. Probably. It seemed that one side of the space station was a massive atrium, with a bunch of these meadow-like caves on the bottom floor. There were people there, arriving in flashes of yellow light from the metal caves. He wandered some more, finding lots and lots of meeting rooms and rooms with computers. Boring. Some of the rooms did have people in them, but he didn't really recognize any of them, so he didn't say hi. Stranger danger, and all that. There was the gym, too. He hadn't known there was so much stuff that can be used to work out. Danny may have spent a couple of minutes playing with the yoga balls. Sitting on them, putting them under his stomach, and just rolling along the floor, giggling while doing so. His muscles were getting tired. Danny hadn't really walked around this much since he'd woken up. He decided to rest, sitting against the wall and happily eating some of the Kit Kat bars he'd pilfered. As he sat there, an announcement came over the speakers in the ceiling. He had no idea the place had an intercom. Attention, all Leaguers. We have a missing child who was liberated from a mission last week. If you spot him, please contact the monitor room. He recognized the voice. Was that Miss Martian? Uh-oh. That one's probably for him. He needed to find Nightwing fast. Heck, he would even take Red Hood or Red Robin. They were nice to him. Batman and Diana were tied for fourth. He really didn't want to go back to his room. It was kind of starting to feel like a cell. Exploring had been so much more interesting than being cooped up there, even if a lot of the room wore burring. Huffing, he stood up, double-checking that he was still invincible. His legs hurt, but hopefully he shouldn't have to go much further. Nightwing in his room couldn't be that far away. Danny began to search even more rooms, getting more and more disappointed at each one. He'd found the bedroom, but they were empty, and he couldn't tell who any of these belonged to. They all looked so bare and dull. Why hadn't anyone painted their room, or put little stars on the ceiling? Danny could feel himself getting annoyed and frustrated. Why was this so hard? He sniffed, feeling tears of frustration start to form. He was really tired, and he'd been searching for what felt like a long time. Was it really that much to ask to find Nightwing? Bud, you there? Called a man dressed in all blue with red underwear and a red cape. He also had a giant S on his chest. Superman. Superman reached a hand up and pressed it near his ear. I don't see anything here, but I can hear the boy's heartbeat. He's nearby. Yes, it's him. He had a pretty distinct heartbeat, Superman said wryly. Superman could hear his heartbeat? That was pretty cool. What else could he do? Danny sniffed again and wiped at his eye. Hey, bud, what are you doing out here? Superman asked, crouching down. Danny couldn't help but giggle, since Superman was staring at his invisible chest and not his face, probably looking where he heard Danny's heart. I'm exploring. Looking for Nightwing, Danny said, letting his invisibility drop. I'm sorry, buddy, but he's not on the Watchtower right now. I can ask when he'll be back. Why don't we go back to your room and wait for him, okay? Danny frowned. No wonder he couldn't find Nightwing. He wasn't even here. He couldn't help but feel disappointed. No. No? Superman asked, surprised. No, Danny repeated grumpily. He didn't want to go back to that dumb room. He was bored there. Well, you can't wander the hallway, kiddo. So we have to go somewhere else, okay? Danny eyed the adult. You can't make me. Oh, I'm pretty sure Superman cut off and his hand slid right through Danny. Danny didn't even bother to hide his pleased smile. No, you can't, he said in a sing-song voice, thrilled by Superman's shocked expression. A mischievous idea popped into his head. Come find me, he yelled, before turning on his heel and running off, fainting through a few walls. Superman would probably keep looking for him, making it a perpetual game of hide-and-seek, where the adult went always sneaking and he went always hiding. Perfect. He didn't really want to be the sneaker. Danny made his way back to the kitchen and hid under one of the tables, making sure he was invisible once again. He was not going to make it easy for Superman. He was going to have to find Danny the hard way, by listening to his heartbeat. There were 2 people standing at the kitchen counter, one in red with yellow lightning bolts on his head, and a man in green who kind of looked like Robin Hood. They hadn't noticed Danny, as he'd come through the wall and been invincible at the time. Danny didn't have to wait long before Superman came through the door. Hey, Snoop, what's up? Don't you have monitor duty? The man in red and yellow asked. Did you hear the announcement? McGann lost the Cadmus kid. He's not lost, he just wandered off, Superman responded. His eyes were looking at the table Danny was hiding under. Danny held his breath. Superman's eye moved over to a different table. Danny breathed a small sigh of relief. Superman then crouched down and looked under it. Nope, not here. Danny giggled before slapping his hand over his mouth. It was really funny that Superman hadn't found him yet, but he didn't want to give himself away. A smile spread across Superman's face before he made his way to the next couple of tables. Searching under them, opening up some of the cabinets in the pantry, searching for Danny. Danny kept his hand over his mouth, but that couldn't really hide the giggles and the laughter that was coming from him. He knew that Superman was doing this on purpose, but it was still really hilarious. The red and yellow boatman and the knockoff Robin Hood had a pretty good idea of where he was, based on how they were staring at the table that Danny was hiding under. Must not be here. Let me know if you see him. Bye, guys, Superman said with a wink at the 2 men before he walked out the door. That was not how this was supposed to go. Superman was supposed to keep searching for him till he found Danny. Then Danny would hide again, and Superman would look for him. So on, so forth. Superman wasn't supposed to just leave. Letting his invincibility drop, he crawled out from under the table, keeping an eye on the other 2 people in the room. The boatman had his mouth hanging open. The green hoodie guy looked both annoyed and surprised. Whatever, not important. He had to follow Superman. He approached the door, letting it slide open, before he peeked his head out into the hallway. He spotted the red and blue clad man looking into the different rooms, unaware of Danny. He huffed before following. Really, He thought the man had been smart. Had the hero really not known he was there under the table, with a giggle and a heartbeat? Danny followed the adult hero down a different hallway, half curious and half annoyed. They made their way to the main atrium, not too far from where all the meeting rooms and the medical section was. Danny went a bit more cautious entering the large open space. There were less places for him to hide here. Hesitantly, cautiously, he creeped into the open hallway that looked out into the atrium. Where was Superman? He'd just seen him. Where had he gone? Gotcha, exclaimed Superman's voice as two large hands grabbed him from under the armpit and lifted him high into the air, placing him on top of Superman's shoulder. Danny squeaked in surprise, looking down at the person he was now sitting on top of. He hadn't been expecting that, but it felt nice to sit down. I thought we were playing hide and seek, he asked. Oh, I'm not sure about that. Besides, you were cheating, Superman teased. Danny huffed, crossing his arms. You were too, listening to people's heartbeats and totally cheating. Then we were both cheating, Superman said. Danny grumbled, putting his crossed arms on top of the hero's head, then resting his own head on his arm. I guess, but you totally tricked me. You knew where I was the entire time, he accused. I did, the man admitted, floating out into the open space of the atrium. But you had fun, didn't you? Yeah. They were both silent as Superman floated them down to the bottom of the atrium, where all the metal caves were. Miss Martian floated in a moment later. Superman, you found him, she said with relief. Danny squirmed, feeling a bit guilty. He hadn't meant to make her worry that much. Honest. He just wanted to get out of that room. I'm surprised he was able to slip away without you noticing, Superman remarked. She grimaced. His mental presence can be hard to detect at times. He seems to be adept at hiding his presence. No kidding. He can turn invincible and density shift no problem. I'd guess he has some Martian in him. I can hear you, you know, Danny reminded them grumpily, pouting from his tall perch. Floating up till she and eye level with him, Miss Martian opened her arm to grab him. Why don't we go back to your room, okay, kiddo? Danny eyed her warily. He didn't want to go back, but he was tired. His exploration mission had wiped him out. Sighing, he let Miss Martian pick him up. When is Nightwing going to be here? He asked moodily. He wanted Nightwing to be the first person he told his name to. And he wanted to ask when he was getting out of here. He'd been patient, but he was tired of being cooped up. It wasn't fair. He's not scheduled to arrive for another 6 hours, she told him placatingly. Danny frowned. 6 hours? That was a long time. But maybe if he napped, then he wouldn't be so tired when Nightwing came. Ancient, he hated that his body was so weak and got tired so easily. He felt like he used to be able to stay up much longer. Not only that, but he hadn't even walked that far, and his legs were tired. Bye, Superman, and thank you again for finding him, Miss Martian said with a grateful smile, as she began to drift away, Danny in her arms. Looking back at the large and beefy man, Danny called, Bye, Mr. Superman. We should play hide and seek again sometime. Looking forward to it, the hero said with a grin and a wave. They made it back to the room in the medical ring much too quickly. As soon as he was released, Danny made his way to the bed, hopping up on it. Looking at the female hero, he pondered for a moment, then asked, You'll wake me up when Nightwing gets here, right? Of course. He didn't know if he trusted her. She was a hero, but they were keeping all sorts of things from him, which wasn't cool at all. Danny deserved to know it, didn't he? It was about him in the first place. Knowing now that they couldn't really keep him locked up here helped. He could theoretically escape at any time, except for the fact that he was pretty sure he couldn't survive in the vacuum of space. So he had no way off the Watchtower. The metal cave, though, that the people used to teleport in and out, that seemed to be his way out. He'd have to ask Nightwing. Although, Nightwing wasn't a hero too. He was part of the reason Danny was confined here in the room. His innermost self, his very core, trusted the man, said that Nightwing was family and wouldn't hurt him. It vaguely recognized Batman, Red Hood, Red Robin, Spoiler, Orphan, Signal, and Robin as family too. But it was the strongest for Nightwing. Danny wasn't sure why. Maybe it had to do with empowered? Or maybe the previous Danny had watched Nightwing in particular, and decided that is who he should hang out with once he crossed dimensions? There were too many questions and no answers. Grumbling, Danny snuggled into a scratchy pillow and let himself drift to sleep. Hopefully, Miss Martian would wake him up as she said. Danny awoke sometime later to whispering. That hadn't been what woke him up, though. It had been his inner self, his heart, saying that Nightwing was here and was upset. So Danny should do something about that. Blinking his eyes, he stayed still, eavesdropping on the conversation happening just feet away. Telling me that he can density shift? Like it's nothing? I remember that it took you years to learn and perfect. He's tiny. How could he have learned that already? Came a harsh, frantic whisper. Oh, that was Nightwing. Why would he upset that Danny could fade through stuff? And why were they calling it density shifting? 'Cause that's not what Danny was doing, right? I have no idea. He shouldn't be able to do that. But you know we've had trouble figuring out, well, what different species he's made up of, and from who specifically. Although the density shifting, along with the invincibility, the floating, and the ability to hide his mind from mine and Uncle John's mind, makes me think that he's definitely part Martian. Miss Martian whispered softly. This sucks. We find him in a Cadmus lab. Our preliminary scan of him, and the file we were able to salvage, told us he's made from some of my DNA, but we can't figure out who the other donors are. Nightwing sighed deeply. Trying to be as quiet as possible, Danny sat up. Nightwing was sitting on one of the hard plastic chairs, his head buried in his hands. So, he was made from Nightwing? Like a kid? Or a clone? His mind whispered. Danny frowned. Why did he feel like he knew a lot about clones? They tended to not be as stable, and didn't always end up looking like who they were cloned from, especially if the original had powers. Danny looked down at his hand. Why did he know this? Was that because he was a clone? Is that why he was so weak all the time? He wasn't stable? That did explain why he felt such a pull towards Nightwing, though, if Nightwing wasn't original. But Nightwing had mentioned other donors. Does that mean he was made up of other people, too? Ugh. Even more mysteries with no answers. There was so much he had to figure out. But first things first, Nightwing was upset, and he didn't like that. Not only that, but Miss Martian had totally lied. She hadn't woken him when Nightwing had arrived. Sliding down from the bed, Danny walked over to the two adults. Their heads snapped over to look at him. He hadn't exactly been quiet when he'd gotten off the bed. At least his legs and feet no longer ached. And that always made all his pain go away. It was like a reset button. Stopping just in front of the man sitting in the chair, he turned to look up at the Martian woman. You said you'd wake me up when Nightwing got here. You lied, he accused, not even bothering to see her reaction. He turned to the man in front of him. Why? Why are you upset? Is it because I'm a clone of sort? Danny asked, fear and dread gripping his heart. He didn't know what he'd do if the answer was yes. Okay, that's a wrap on chapter 2. Like last time, I hope you guys enjoyed. I don't know about you, but that entire hide and seek scene was so adorable. I'll try to get chapter 3 up soon. We don't want to leave the baby anxious on that cliffhanger. So, I'll be back soon. Bye.